It's myth busting time. What is fluency and why is it not what you think, right? So many people think when it comes to fluency that I'm 28, I can talk very well on linguistics or sports, biology, kinesiology, whatever it is, right? And I should be able to speak on that thing, right? But that is not fluency. That is fluency after having lived 25 years in the language, right? What is actual fluency? What age, I'll leave this open to you guys, what age would you consider that a person speaks fluently, right? I would say that's around 5, 6 years old, right? Now, of course, their topics are limited. They're talking about their immediate life, their hobbies, the fact that they like to play in the sandbox, right? But they're able to have full-on conversations, discuss their feelings, talk about what they're gonna do this weekend, talk about what they did last week, right? Fluency is not being able to express yourself on the level you currently can in English. Fluency is being able to have a good conversation, right? And if you're talking to a 5 or 6 year old, he's able to tell you a lot of stuff, right? He might stutter, he might make a couple mistakes, he might not know a word, right? And he's not gonna be talking about biochemistry, right? But he's still having a fluent conversation, right? So when you're starting out, don't think, oh my God, I can't speak until I get to the point where I can speak on everything I can speak about in English and Spanish. No. You should be trying to speak like you're 5 years old. Right? Once you get to that level, you can consider yourself kind of fluent, right? A 5-year-old speaks at a B1 level. He's not making very many mistakes. He's talking about everything he wants to talk about, right? And all it takes is time within the language to get to the point where you are in English, right? And it doesn't have to take 26 years or 50 years or 75 years. You can cut that time frame down significantly by studying correctly. One of the best ways you can get to being able to talk about topics you like is reading about those topics in the language you're trying to learn, Spanish, right? So if you're interested in cooking, if you're interested in sports, if you're interested in martial arts, if you're interested in surfing, skating, yoga, whatever, right? Read articles in that language, right? There's all kinds of blog posts. You can read Wikipedia. You can listen to videos in Spanish, right? There's so many options, right? And so when it comes to measuring fluency, there's this scale called the CEFR scale, which I think stands for the Common European Framework Resource, or something like that. I don't know what they are, right? But this essentially breaks language learning down into 6 levels. There's A, B, and C, right? A level is your beginner level. B level is intermediate, and C is functionally fluent, able to talk about most things you can talk about in English, right? It's advanced. Now, within that category, there is level 1 and level 2, right? So we get 6 total levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, right? And so A1 is the most basic of levels, right? You're able to introduce yourself, ask "Cómo estás?" How are you, right? You can order in a restaurant, get some basic directions, handle some basic scenarios, going shopping, things like that. But it's pretty limited. It's what I call survival Spanish. Right? Next up, we have A2, which is what I refer to as basic traveler level Spanish. And so this is where we start to get into talking about likes and dislikes. We can talk about our plans for this weekend, right? We can talk in a limited way about the things we've done while we're in a country maybe. We're starting to handle more situations into a better degree. And you can talk about your family, your friends, right? Give some basic background information on them. You describe descriptions, emotions, things like that. Next up, we have the B1, which B1 is really good traveler level Spanish, right? This is where you start to get into the past tense. So you can start to tell stories. You can start to talk about what you did last week, what you did last weekend, right? You're starting to express yourself with a little bit more detail. You're now gotten beyond just simple sentences in the A level, now making connecting sentences, longer sentences, more complex. You're providing more sensory details, color, size, shape, things like that. You're able to give your main points. You're able to understand relatively slow speech and get the gist, right? And you're able to have a basic conversation. You might not get every detail, that's okay. You're getting the basics outline of the conversation. You can deal with things like booking a hotel, resolving travel issues. You can talk about your job, your hobbies, your background in quite a bit of detail. You can talk in depth. You can talk basically about the past. You can talk pretty in depth about the future and what you're planning to do, right? And you can give your opinions on topics that are familiar with you, whether that's sports or whatever your hobby is or whatever you study maybe in school. And you can have a pretty light, pretty fluent conversation in Spanish, right? This is like that 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old speaking Spanish, right? Next up is B2. B2 is like a middle school kid, right? B2, you can debate, you can give your opinion, you can make arguments, give reasons to why, you follow along with, at the very least, the gist. You're also getting quite a few details of things like podcasts, or books, or the news, or the radio, whatever it may be. And you speak for quite a long time about most things, right? Specifically of things that are familiar to you, and even things that are less familiar to you. You can still give your opinion, talk about them, and have a good conversation. You're making less mistakes now, although there are still some. You're able to have a pretty fluent back and forth conversation with a native speaker, understanding most of what they say, even starting to handle a little bit of slang, some cursing, things like that, right? And this is generally when people can pass what is called the Barstool Test, and I'll talk about that later on another video. You're able to make comparisons or give advice. You're able to deal with traveling long term or some situations you might face that are a little bit more complex, like maybe going to the bank or going to the pharmacist, things like that, within the language while you're abroad. You can write some basic emails for work using a tool to make sure that it's grammatically correct. And you can have a conversation with a person without needing to speak to English, and you can talk for quite a long time. This is the point where your brain will probably start to hurt because you're using a language and you're being more complex and you're speaking the language a little bit longer time. Next up is C1, and this is functionally fluent. You can speak about most things in quite a lot of detail on even things that you're not as familiar with. Pretty much everything you have a basic knowledge of in English, you can speak about in Spanish. You're able to joke, you're able to persuade people, you're able to argue, you're able to express nuance, right? You're able to think in the language, and conversation feels really, really natural. And for the most part, you could work or study in the language without much of a problem, right? You could attend a university class, in your opinion, and participate in conversation. You could debate controversial topics at the dinner table with friends. You can handle a disagreement with some friends and kind of get them to reconcile and chill out. And you can travel long-term in a country or live abroad in a country and handle most everything, including legal things, health issues, going to the doctor, things like that. And then we have C2, which C2 is fluent. If you are C2 in a language, there is not anything you can't speak about in English that you can't speak about in Spanish. Any situation that you would feel comfortable facing in English, any topic you would feel comfortable speaking about, you can speak about this in Spanish, right? You have a good grip on cultural references. You've studied a little bit of the culture, so you've seen TV shows, or you're able to songs. You're able to get jokes, right? You're able to get plays on words, double entendres, right? You're, for all intents and purposes, a native Spanish-speaking person. So what is the test? The Barstool Test is the question of, can I sit with a beer at a bar with a friend and have a conversation where I'm not struggling too much to speak and they're not struggling too much to understand me, right? Now, this for most people happens somewhere around that upper B1 to low B2 level, right? Where you're able to sit down and have a good conversation, you're not making a ton of mistakes, or at the very least the mistakes you're making aren't hindering comprehension, right? You're able to make jokes and laugh, you're able to understand some more spicy language, you have a wide repertoire of vocab, right? Anything you're interested in, you should be able to have a very decent conversation on. But then if you start getting into more technical things, you start talking about architecture, or you start talking about sciences, or art history, things like that, you might struggle a little bit. You might have to go back to getting just the gist. But pretty much anything else, your hobbies, your daily life, your plans, your past weekend, anything like that is A-okay. You're able to deal with that situation. So essentially, it's the question of, can you handle casual, unanticipated, unscripted speech? Can you understand jokes and nuance and colloquial expressions? And can you express your thoughts and opinions on things without needing too long of pauses to search for words and without making so many mistakes that the other person is like, oh my God, why is this person speaking? If you're able to pass the Barstool Test, you are able to go out and live in a Spanish-speaking country, and now you can start to not just study the language, but also learn through using the language, whether that's reading, whether that's writing, whether that's joining classes, whether that's watching movies, listening to music, right? Whatever it may be, you're able to get past just like, I need to sit here and study the basics and force memorize words. You'll be able to watch a movie show or a TV show and pick up a dozen words throughout the course of that TV show because you're able to read along and understand the subtitles. And you're able to pick out words and be like, I didn't know that word, but it's close enough to this word in English that I can guess now. You start to recognize patterns in words, how they change from English to Spanish, right? And you're allowed to now have a lot of fun with the language. You can go out, have friends, you can participate in hobbies in the language, right? You can go to a salsa class, whatever you want to do, join a film night, right? That is where language learning starts to get really, really fun, right? For me, even though I've studied probably a dozen languages at this point, and I speak probably 6 to a competent degree, I would say that only 3 probably pass the Barstool test. And that is Spanish, obviously, French, and Portuguese, right? I would say my German is somewhere on that A2, B1 level, because I haven't spoken in a very long time. I find that when I speak to German friends, it comes back pretty quickly. I'm able to understand kind of the gist of things, right? And then Arabic and Italian are kind of in that A2. Arabic's kind of trending towards that B1, where I can start to express some more complex thoughts, but I'm not very technical. I'm able to talk about hobbies and my life, my friends and family, things like that, but that's basically it. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you want information on classes, be sure to leave a comment in the class down below. If you want a Spanish habit tracker, be sure to send me a DM and I will get that sent over to you. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one.